So I've seen a lot of founders who lose sight on, say, targeting more revenue and continuously believe that their only motive in life is to raise funds.
Same product which you were thinking will fail or has already failed can just be repackaged and sold as something else. And it suddenly changes the whole ball game for you. And today, their valuations have also exceeded 10x. They are into the markets with a much, much better receptivity. And soon I'll be able to even announce them, maybe sometime soon, who they are. Yeah.
Because they were listening to too many mentors.
So very recently, I was speaking to a relationship coach, and I said, in today's day, a relationship coach is required even more for founders of startups than couples like it used to be.
The future will not remain at a textbook level. There's a lot of digitization happening of the written inventory, and the need for experience reality is happening more in the corporate space.
Hi, welcome to part 2 of the Startup Mortality episode, which is an extension of part 1 where we discussed various aspects of startup mortality. आप अभी तक तो ये जान चुके हैं कि ऐसा एक गुड़ी गुड़ी शो तो है नहीं कि हम फाउंडर्स को पूछेंगे कि आप बचपन में क्या करते थे, फिर फाउंडर्स बताएंगे कि जब मैं छोटा बच्चा था बड़ी शरारत करता था, मेरी चोरी पकड़ी जाती। नहीं, ये सब नहीं है इस शो में। ना ही इस शो में ऐसे कुछ है जहाँ पे हम फाउंडर्स को कुछ खरी खोटी सुनाएंगे। दिस शो इज अबाउट ट्राइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड फ्रॉम द फाउंडर्स पर्सपेक्टिव्स, फ्रॉम द इन्वेस्टर्स पर्सपेक्टिव्स, फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ वेरियस स्टेक होल्डर्स, what are some of the success stories, what are some of the snakes, the pitfalls that these founders encountered, how did they kind of conquer those snakes, and if we can kind of take a leaf out from the experiences shared by our investors, by our experts, by the founders, that could be counted as a success for this show. क्योंकि आप इस शो में से ऐसा कुछ निकाल पाए जो आपके स्टार्टअप में, whether you are a founder or whether you are an investor, आप आपके स्टार्टअप में ऐसी कुछ चीज़ इस्तेमाल कर सके, ऐसी कुछ चीज़ कॉन्कर कर सके जो शायद अपने आप करना मुश्किल होता. सो वेलकम टू पार्ट 2 ऑफ द स्नेक्स एंड लैडर्स थीमैटिक एपिसोड ऑन स्टार्टअप मॉर्टैलिटी. अभी जो आप स्क्रीन देख रहे हैं आपको थोड़ा ताजुब होगा. व्हाट काइंड ऑफ स्क्रीन इज दिस? इट लुक्स लाइक अ स्नेक्स एंड लैडर्स बोर्ड, बट देयर आर नो स्नेक्स एंड देयर आर नो लैडर्स. But isn't that how it is in real life? Snakes और ladders बता के आते नहीं हैं, बहुत बार तो सतर्क रहना पड़ता है. And that is the reality that most founders face. In fact, one of the things we keep saying on our show is that most of the time the snakes and ladders are invisible. But a particular situation, a circumstance that presents itself could actually get converted into a snake or a ladder depending on how the founder decided to play that ball. Right? That's all the show is all about. What you see on the screen is a list. Certainly not a comprehensive list by any stretch of imagination. A list planted there just for you to jog and scrub the circumstances that are surrounding your startup at this point of time. Have a look. In fact, as you would recollect, in our earlier episodes, we have introduced a new segment called Roll the Dice, where we invite you to share your clips. Have a look. As founders, you have watched a couple of episodes of the Snakes and Ladders, but I'm sure there must be a thought crossing your mind about a snake lurking out there or some ladder you would love to see getting manifested. If you have some such question, you could now send your question to us via a small video recording, not more than 45 seconds, which you could just put on a Google Drive and send to us. And we will try and see if we can get you the answer. We'll also try and see if we can get an investor or an expert to answer that question for you and feature your question in the next episode. Just one suggestion. Please don't make impossible demands like, oh, you know what? I want to speak to Mr. Elon Musk. Or can you please get me Mr. Ratan Tata? Or Vijay Shekhar Sharma Hazir ho. Ain't happening. But if your questions are more like we have just embarked, finished the MVP, not sure whether we should go down the B2B route or the B2C route, or we are a food tech or an edtech startup, and we aren't able to get investor conversations or investor meetings, what do you think we should do differently? Or maybe we are a pre Series A startup or a Series A startup, and different investors are telling us different things about what we should be doing. What do you think is the way out? Those kind of questions, bring them on. But remember one thing, the answer to every question you have not asked is always a no. So, question bhej do, just send it across in our section called Roll the Dice. As they say in that famous Hindi song, Dao laga le bhai, Dao laga le. आपको याद होगा हमने एक शॉर्टलिस्ट दिखाई थी, और इस शॉर्टलिस्ट में ऐसे बहुत सारे पॉइंट्स थे जो शायद किसी फाउंडर को, किसी इन्वेस्टर को पोटेंशियली परेशान कर सकते हैं. But to talk of these points and to extract some real life experiences, some real life anecdotes, you have met our investors, our experts in part one, where we had invited Suraj Juneja, a serial entrepreneur, an investor, and a venture builder who is the founder and chief venture builder of Free Flow Ventures. And our second guest was Rishi Kappal, a startup evangelist who has created not one, but two entrepreneurship innovation centers. He's a 5 times author, Stanford lead alumni, and ex-CEO of Sony, Qualcomm, and Castrol. Suraj, hi. To continue our conversation, I would like to start by asking you about some more common pitfalls or snakes faced by founders that you recollect.
Yeah, so again, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people must have mentioned that, one of the snakes is not getting funding in the beginning and so on and so forth. But I think one of the main snakes that could actually bite a founder is getting too much funding in the beginning or getting funding too early down the line. Now, I've seen it with a lot of founders, I've seen it in a lot of startups, that if they get funding too early down the line or too much funding than they require, what happens? It inhibits your creative thinking. Now, when you don't have funds, and you can relate that to yourself or most people that you know about, when you don't have funds, automatically your brain starts thinking about creative ideas which are out of the box. How do I growth hack? How do I do things differently? How do I attach myself to somebody else so that I can get their sales or their customers, and so on and so forth? So you'll always try different things. You'll try pivoting in different ways. You'll try to leverage different people's strengths and so on and so forth. But if you get funds too early on in the journey of being a founder or in your startup, your total focus goes on spending that money. There is also a investor expectation which is on you, which wants you to spend that money. You have to show him a direct ROI. So the whole magic of creation actually gets lost. The whole magic of creating a brilliant product or solving a problem gets lost in this whole dimension of getting the funds, spending those funds, what you really created and how it could have benefited the market that you're going to. It gets lost. Yes, funding is important, 100% it is, but only when it acts like fuel to fire, that you know exactly what you're doing, where your product is supposed to go. It's already been tested in, let's say, one market, and that money is going to take you to 100 markets. Great. But before that, too early, in the journey, I think it's a big snake that one should be wary of.
Let's come to some more ladders, Suraj. What, in your experience as a serial entrepreneur, investor, venture builder, are some awesome examples of ladders that founders created, either on their own or with your help?
Yeah. So another ladder, which is I think one of the most powerful ladders which is out there, which again don't many founders don't look at it, and that is the ability to pivot. I'll give you a very direct example. There was a particular startup that we funded, still exists with us. They came into the energy bar segment, and they gave it a name which was not very relevant, and people didn't understand what the name was. Basically, I call that marketing myopia. When we think that this particular product is being bought by me, or I would buy this product, we feel everybody's going to buy it. So they fell in that trap. However, the product was brilliant. no preservatives, no chemicals, no sugar, no gluten, and yet a very, very tasty product. But they went into the energy bar segment. Cut to today when they're pivoting and when we work with them, and now that they've pivoted, now that same product is marketed as a dark chocolate. It's packaged as a dark chocolate. It's packaged as a category of clean foods where it does not have all of these unhealthy ingredients in it. Secondly, the brand name has changed. It's become something which is more relevant, which people can understand. And suddenly, from a market size of X, they've gone into a market size of 100X, yet the product being exactly the same, just in a different format and differently packaged. So sometimes it's just a small step, sometimes a small shift in mindset also, or a little idea that can come to you that the same product which you were thinking will fail or has already failed can just be repackaged and sold as something else. And it suddenly changes the whole ball game for you. And today, their valuations have also exceeded 10x. They are into the markets with a much better receptivity, and soon I'll be able to even announce them, maybe sometime soon, who they are. Yeah.
Terrific. Considering that each founder goes through a different set of experiences, each founder's journey is different. Is there any other awesome ladder that you have seen founders leverage?
I think one of my most favorite ladders, which I've actually been climbing or trying to climb since the time I started business, is growth hacking. Now, growth hacking is something which means that you try to leverage other people's strengths in the market, other collaborator strengths in the market, and play on that. I'll give you an example. For example, if you're coming out with a product, one option is that you start finding customers for yourself. You go out to the market, you start finding individual customers or bulk of customers by yourself, and that's a tedious task. Or you try to locate or find one client or a couple of clients who have all your customers. One of the examples is Cred. Now, what did Cred do? Cred has a loyalty program for credit card owners. They have a platform, but they didn't go out to the market and start finding customers that please come download Cred and so on and so forth. This straight away tied up with banks, and banks have lakhs of customers who already own credit cards. So already on day one, thanks to just their platform and this little growth hacking tip, all those customers are actually under them, and they don't have to acquire them themselves. Similarly, today, if you're a founder and if you come up with a product which actually could be used by customers of Zomato, customers of Swiggy, just imagine on day one, if you do the tab with one of these companies, you'll be sitting with millions of customers on day one. That is why that is why certain startups, they become unicorns in 6 months to even 1 year, because they've done growth hacking and they already make a product with a target that they're going to be targeting these clients, and they'll be able to service all their millions of customers. In a population of a country like India, right now, this is very, very, very possible. And in fact, most of these bigger startups are looking at newer startups to help them grow even further. And this is how it happens. So I think that is something which startup founders should look out for. And not many are looking at that direction properly.
Awesome. I would now like to turn to Rishi Kappal. Rishi, you spoke about a phrase called over mentoring. You introduced us to something called snowflakes, imposters. I was curious to know what has bothered some of the founders, some snakes that most startup founders have been blind to.
Okay, so this one is slightly cliche, but let me still say it. So it is about having the wrong KPIs for the organization. So I've seen a lot of founders who lose sight on, say, targeting more revenue, and continuously believe that their only motive in life is to raise funds. So it is about, the founders also relying on paying the salaries of the employees subject to the funding coming in, rather than having a KPI to say that my revenue and my operations should at least sustain my organization. So how does that mindset get developed? I don't know, but we are made for funding, and our only success is when we are told by others that yes, you have raised some funds, is the success or is the KPI of success of the organization, has been something which I've seen too often. And I still believe that it becomes a real snake in terms of the individual not focusing on making a self-sustaining organization.
Rishi, would you like to share a situation a startup faced where a near impossible situation was converted into a ladder?
Yeah, so the one ladder is that you should have a ladder of pivot as soon as you can. And I can give you an example of a company whose business was completely hampered by COVID. So the company's name is Classport. You might have also known the founders. Now, Classport had a flourishing business which came to standstill in the COVID time, and they pivoted into a company called Coach X. And Coach X basically took advantage of all the disadvantages of COVID and created a new venture, keeping the philosophy of the organization and resilience to be the same. So the first ladder is that it is not in ego state or a or an emotional state to say why should I pivot. It is about the market telling you that the organization has a survival threat. And I would say that the way these co-founders transitioned from pivoting Classboard to Coach X is one of the best growth and ladder perspective I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years.
Awesome. Yes. In fact, I remember some of these fabulous startups mentioned in your book, Kites in a Hurricane. Please do share with our viewers some other examples of awesome ladders that they need to keep in mind.
Okay, so the second ladder is that even when you have developed a product and launched it, you should still keep an eye on the market if the market is changing. And this is a personal experience. So I run a company called Teens Clap, which is a company which provides education solutions. And for us, market research is hygiene. So we did not believe in the fact that once we have the product, nothing can change in the marketplace. And what it did is that it gave us a surprising output, which said that the product which we were trying to position for third year and final year students of colleges actually has a product market fit for first year students. And a version of that has had a product market fit for students between 6th to 10th grade. So it all happened because while we were successfully moving it into the domain where we wanted it to move, we were still collecting data on what other needs exist in the same sector. So we were not diversifying in the sector, but we were deep diving in the same sector. And today, if you see the work that we do, is basically because of somebody keeping a constant eye on the changes in the market, and the same product has actually fitted better to a different target audience. So one should not discount market research. If the product is already out, you can actually thrive better by constant market research showing showing some very interesting trends which you can leverage.
This is really getting very interesting. What would you like to share as another example of how a ladder was literally created from thin air?
Okay, so there is something which a lot of founders think about is called know what the future is. So I can talk about this organization called Simulanis. So Simulanis today is one of India's largest XR company, as they call themselves, experience reality company. And they were into augmented reality, virtual reality earlier, but they started by becoming a book publisher. So they used to create proper published books, which were augmented reality enabled. And in the course of their conversations with the ecosystem, and they were a part of EduGuild as well, where we would have mentored them together, they realized that the future will not remain at a textbook level. There's a lot of digitization happening of the written inventory, and the need for experience reality is happening more in the corporate space. So they realized this early in life and created that as a ladder, that all the intellectual property they had created in terms of augmented reality, they moved it into augmented reality, virtual reality, and into the corporate learning and development space, which has turned out to be their future in a way that now they're also in London, they're also opening up offices in Japan, which I don't think it would have happened had they remained a publisher of augmented reality books.
Coming back to Suraj, I'd like to play a small rapid fire round with you and give you one word and seek your reaction or your inputs on each word that I'm going to share with you. So your first word is bootstrapping.
Creativity. So when you're bootstrapped, you just become more creative. You think out of the box. There's nothing negative with bootstrapping. I think it's phenomenal. As long as you can, one should bootstrap.
Great. Your next word is technology obsolescence.
Unpreparedness. So when you comes to technology, you should always be 5 steps ahead. You should always have 5 features lying with you, which you've still not launched in the market, but you could in due course in time. Always, whenever there's any technology product.
Awesome. The next word for you is compliance.
Nightmare. Because in today's day, the government is after you to be totally compliant. And even if they weren't, if you're a startup founder from day one, you should be fully compliant, because if you're going to be raising funds also in the future, Or even if you take a small venture debt, for example, if you're a D2C company and you're taking venture debt from any company, they will first see that you're fully compliant. Otherwise, you won't even get a loan. So you have to be fully compliant from day one, and there are no two ways about that.
And the final and the fourth word for you is founder disputes or team disputes.
Relationship coach. So very recently, I was speaking to a relationship coach, and I said, in today's day, a relationship coach is required even more for founders of startups than couples like it used to be, because they have a much more integrated marriage, and it's a much more important marriage for the investors as well. So I think a relationship coach or a person who could handle these disputes within a company is very important, because sometimes when it's just the founders, things like ego, fear, anxiety, they come into the play. But if there's a third person who's managing, let's say, relationship between a team and between founders, I think that is a key to the success, to keep it to a third party.
Rishi, for you, not exactly a rapid fire, but if I were to ask you to share a couple of generic points that have the potential to go either way, as in something that could become a snake or morph into a ladder, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, so I have just got three small points to make, that there are certain things in a founder's psychology which can become a snake or a ladder. So one is the founder's mindset itself. And I encourage a lot of founders to read something called as Erickson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. Because the behavior of a founder is very closely related to the personal life of the founder, which they may not want to probably confess. So knowing the 8 stages of psychosocial development is very important, in my opinion, for a founder to understand how his or her mindset is. The second thing is that founders get into a lot of confirmation bias. So people who come with corporate experience might say that this is the only way things have to be done, and they come with premeditated notions. And I recently did a study on female entrepreneurs, and female entrepreneurs, for some reason, were very reluctant to delegate. So they believed that delegation in the eyes of others is considered as weakness, that you cannot do it yourself, so you are delegating. So confirmation bias is important. And the third is that your passion may not necessarily become a venture. So if you're trying to solve a problem which you have faced, may not necessarily be a problem which people are willing to pay for. So you might create a different venture, which is your profession and which may not meet your passion. So don't keep on pushing your passion, which nobody wants to pay for. So these are things which can go in any direction. It can become a snake if you still persevere on it, and it become a ladder if you really accept the reality and move on. So these are the three elements which are the gray zones for me.
Rishi, a word of advice for all the founders out there watching the show?
So one advice is that there is a phenomenon called executive isolation, and founders really feel lonely. That is one mindset which say they should either avoid by having a few people who can share the burden of confidentiality with them, or they should have a mentor who's a ghost to the organization, because over mentoring is also very difficult. So in my last 5 years, I've completed a PhD in organizational psychology, and the result has shown that startup founders actually feel lonely at the workplace, and they are very skeptical to share the burden of confidentiality. So they should really have somebody who can ensure that their moments of truth, of isolation, are taken care of, because decisions at that time generally are not good for the organization. Rest everything, funding, revenues are something which is not even worth repeating. But this is something which I've realized, that their isolation plays a very important role in the way they grow the organization forward.
So that brings us to the end of part two of the theme that we had created around startup mortality. I want to take the opportunity to thank Suraj and Rishi for taking the time out and sharing from their rich experiences the absolute gems of wisdom that are going to be immensely valuable to some of the founders and investors out there. Remember to roll the dice. If you would like to feature on the show, if you would like to ask a question, have a look at the Roll the Dice segment. Roll the dice. As founders, you have watched a couple of episodes of the Snakes and Ladders, but I'm sure there must be a thought crossing your mind about a snake lurking out there or some ladder you would love to see getting manifested. If you have some such question, you could now send your question to us via a small video recording, not more than 45 seconds, which you could just put on a Google Drive and send to us. And we will try and see if we can get you the answer. We'll also try and see if we can get an investor or an expert to answer that question for you and feature your question in the next episode. Just one suggestion. Please don't make impossible demands like, oh, you know what? I want to speak to Mr. Elon Musk. Or can you please get me Mr. Ratan Tata? Or Vijay Shekhar Sharma Hazir Ho. Ain't happening. But if your questions are more like, we have just embarked, finished the MVP, not sure whether we should go down the B2B route or the B2C route, or we are a food tech or an ed tech startup, and we aren't able to get investor conversations or investor meetings, what do you think we should do differently? Or maybe we are a pre-series A startup or a series A startup, and different investors are telling us different things about what we should be doing. What do you think is the way out? Those kind of questions, bring them on. But remember one thing, the answer to every question you have not asked is always a no. So question bhej do, just send it across in our section called Roll the Dice. As they say in that famous Hindi song, Daav laga le bhai, daav laga le. Thank you. This concludes part 2 of Startup Mortality. And do watch and subscribe and like this show. And looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Snakes and Ladders show. Till then, have a great day ahead.